I'm reading the second part of my chapter called Saturdays from my book It's Not a Boy. If you remember, we loved Saturdays because we played on the railway line. I listened to my favourite programme on children's favourites on the wireless, and we went shopping once a week on a Saturday and got sweets and comics. Saturday was a good day, but things were changing. We weren't supposed to go on the railway line, and Uncle Sid told us that. But we took no notice. There were some signs that said things like danger, but they were such old signs that we thought they didn't mean anything. But then one day, more big signs were put up by some rail workers, right next to each gate. And this time you could read the writing because they were new signs. Uncle Sid said that they were for people who were driving across the line. Please open far gate before crossing, they said. Of course, us kids fell about laughing. It didn't make sense. You had to cross the railway line to open the gate. How could you open the gate if you didn't cross the line? Anyway, we soon forgot about that and carried on playing with our pennies being squashed. It was always great fun, and Saturdays went on as they always had done, until I did something that changed Saturdays for me forever. I decided I wanted to learn to play our piano. Mam could play, and if she wasn't at her sewing machine, she used to play the piano at night. I used to listen to her when I was in bed, and I could hear the notes dancing up our stairs and into our bedroom. They played about on my bed till they got slower and slower and quieter, and then they fell asleep with me. I thought that playing the piano was wonderful, so I decided that I would learn to play. And I went to our piano and practiced. But then Dad came in for a cup of tea. "Stop that awful noise," he would say, because he wanted some peace and quiet to rest before he went out on our farm again. So I shut the piano lid till he'd gone, and then I crept back and started again. But it was no good. He was right. It was an awful noise. I could not make the notes dance. So Mam said I'd better go for lessons. She arranged for me to go to Sankstead on the bus every Saturday morning for my lesson. I missed my children's wireless programme, and then I missed playing about with the kids on the railway line, trying to squash coins, because when I got back, the last trains had gone through for the morning and the kids had got fed up playing on the line anyway. My teacher was called Mrs. Treasure, and Mam said that she was a treasure because she was a good music teacher. But she couldn't teach me. Every week, after I tried my best, she wrote notes in my little book about my progress, and Mam was always waiting to see what was written there. Has not yet achieved essential skill of hand and eye coordination, it said, which meant that I was no good at playing the piano. So I tried to practice even more. Then one day, after my lesson, and I was standing at the bus stop, there was Freddie Lowe. I'd seen him before because he was Doreen's dad, and it turned out that he'd got a job on a farm right down our lane, over our railway, and miles on past our field's far side and bottom field. He was very pleased because it meant extra money, and he had a little house with the job for his family right down there, and it meant he could keep on with his milking job at Sunkstead morning and night, and then go back to work on the farm down our lane. And as we stood there waiting for our bus, he whistled some tunes. And he was a good whistler, and you could hear the notes dancing about, and they danced all over the bus when we got on, and everybody smiled. Not long after that, Freddie moved into his little cottage with his wife and their 4 kids. He'd brought an old pickup, and it came chugging along with their brightly painted furniture rattling about in the back, making such a noise. Doreen and her little brother and sisters were sitting with the furniture, and they waved and shouted as they passed. We were all watching and standing in our lane. "Good luck to you all," shouted Auntie Vera, and they laughed and waved even more with their arms outstretched until their truck disappeared right down our lane. Our school bus was getting crowded now. There was our Katie going to the high school at Ripsey, and a little gang of us going to Ringham Primary School. There was me, our Gwendy, and Terry with his little brother Stewie, who had just started school, and now there was Doreen as well. We stood there in all weathers at our lane end on a little patch of grass on the roadside that we'd worn bare to the soil. Waiting for our bus every day was quite tiring and often very cold, and we hunched up under our hoods and macks. "My dad says that when things get bad, just whistle," shouted Doreen above the howling wind, and she started her tune. Then we all joined in, and we tried to whistle our way through our favourite tunes that we had heard on the wireless, and we weren't very good at it, but our brave little notes tumbled about in the wind. And before we knew it, we could see our bus suddenly coming out of nowhere, trundling on its way to pick us up. And just as I got on the bus, I saw Freddie Lowe in his old truck, coming from his milking job at Sunkstead and going to work on the farm down our lane. Sometimes at night I stood on our windowsill and I saw his truck again, rattling to Sunkstead for evening milking. And then after an hour or 2 later, I heard him rattling back down our lane to his cottage. Mrs. Lowe got a cleaning job at Ringham, and she walked. She didn't get the bus so that she could save her money of 2 old pennies and help with the housekeeping. "Good expression," wrote Mrs. Treasure on my little book one Saturday. And then she would write some things that I was doing wrong, as I kept on playing the stiff notes. Then one day at home a tiny tune crept out as I practised. It just came out unexpectedly from nowhere, and the notes started dancing. It was only a little stumbling dance, but when Auntie Vera came in, wearing her pretty dress and her best strappy shoes, she took the notes and danced them all over our room. Next Saturday, Mrs. Treasure wrote, "Good progress." And the next thing I knew was that she'd rung Mum to say that I was good enough to take my first music exam. Mrs. Treasure was a treasure after all. My Mum had been right. She could teach me. On the day of my exam, Mum took me to Hull on the bus, and we walked to a street with some tall buildings with big doors. We were in posh streets here, with no bomb rubble in sight. We timidly went through one of the doors with a brass handle, and we sat down on a polished wooden bench. It was dark and cold, and I was suddenly full of fear. It was not the fear of playing on a railway line, which was a nice sort of fear. But this time, this was a frightening fear. I felt like Terry's penny must have when it was on the line waiting to be squashed flat. Then I remembered what Doreen had said about whistling, and I tried to blow through the gap in my front teeth, and some little notes bravely tumbled about. Then after a long wait, it was time to go through the room on my own and try the exam. That was frightening. "Let us commence," said the examiner, looking at me without any expression at all. And he sat back with his arms folded while I played the pieces that I'd practiced for so long. I didn't know if they danced. I was too frightened to listen to them. "Thank you, my dear, that will be all." He looked up and he smiled a flat smile and then started writing in his notebook, and I shuffled out. "Did you do well?" asked Mamma anxiously. She'd been spending money on my music lessons with Mrs. Treasure, and of course it must not be wasted. "I don't know, and I really didn't know, and I kept going over and over all the notes in my head to see if I'd played them in the right order, but I couldn't remember." Then the next Saturday night something awful happened that put my music exam right out of my head. Our Gwendy and me were in bed, listening to Mam playing the piano, and the notes danced up the stairs and into our bedroom and onto our beds as they usually did. We ate our Saturday boiled sweets and read our comics, enjoying every minute. Then that awful thing happened.